right. We had a weird technical glitch, but
Oh.
I think we fixed it. It was just a weird pause, but we'll be good. We'll have to kind of stitch it two little things together. I just noticed for the viewers. How would you compare and contrast Brooklyn, New York, and upstate New York to Florida in terms of the culture?
To Florida?
Yeah.
Aside
from the weather, how would you describe the people?
But New York City and upstate New York are very different too. New York is New York, the most cosmopolitan city in the world. It's hustle bustle, always on the edge. But it's, I enjoyed living there as a teenager for sure. But then, when it was time to raise a family, upstate New York, a little more quiet, a little more low key, a little more serene. Not as congested or crowded, and a little more. I mean, we lived out in the suburbs of Albany, so it was nice.
Okay.
So it was just, climate-wise, it was colder, definitely colder in upstate New York, more snow in upstate New York than New York City.
Oh, how many years have you been teaching in general, from like when you graduated?
Well, classroom teaching, I've had now 20 years here, 10, so 30 years classroom teaching, then the 14 years of college coaching.
And you didn't teach at the same time you did college coaching?
Just a small part in the beginning. I was a full-time high school teacher and the part-time head coach at Albany. But then eventually I flipped to, full-time at the university. So
what university?
Well, it was my alma mater, the University of Albany.
Oh.
University at Albany, yeah.
What degrees do you have from the University of Albany?
I've got my bachelor's degree in political science and my master's degree in social studies education.
Did you enjoy your graduate school experience?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
So I've always heard it's a mix. It's a toss. Some people absolutely hate their masters. Some people fell in love.
No, I enjoyed it. I mean, I was teaching at the high school as I was earning my master's, so I went to night school for about 5 years. I took, 6 credits a semester or so. So that was a little bit challenging, teaching all day and then, then going to university at night. But I enjoyed the graduate classes. I definitely enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Because there was a sense that the stuff you were studying really was going to be applicable to what you're going to do in your career, So,
it wasn't like these general classes.
No, it was focused on social studies education, and educational psychology, things like that. So you knew this is stuff you're going to use.
Okay. And then you did world history primarily.
Yeah, I loved world history, yeah.
Is there a chapter of world history you like talking about?
Well, I've sort of become a more semi-expert on World War II,
Really?
Yeah.
That's
so
a
I
unit in history.
yeah, that's a unit that we do, and because it was really the most important event of the 20th century, so still impacting the world we live in today. So it's and a lot happening. I mean, today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, worldwide.
Really?
So yeah.
Oh, why today?
I'm not sure why it was this day, but it was this was the day that was recognized. Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting.
International Holocaust Remembrance Day.
I know that when I took music history at FGCU, music evolves like really slowly and lethargically, but a big thing and a big emphasis is that like World War II really radicalizes music and composers. Like it's such a jarring event that there's like an actual chapter in musical history that's based on like the effects of World War II. Because like maps had to be redrawn, the cultures were so different after World War II, especially in Europe, in those theaters. So it's interesting that you say that because in my head I'm thinking, oh yeah, like that's 100% true. World War II is this
still shapes the world we live in today.
Bookmark,
right? I mean, we're still talking about NATO and protecting the Ukraine from Russia. That's that's an outflow of the agreements and the alliances that were made after World War II.
What do you think the theme is for students that study World War II? Because I love reading about World War II. I'm recently on this big Manhattan Project Oppenheimer reading a little bit. I'm reading a couple of books about it because I think he's so fascinating and such a complex historical figure. He's like the bringer of death, but also like a pioneer in atomic sciences. So like trying to read about him and just understanding his complexity, I really enjoyed. So what do you think is like? What do you think is the biggest takeaway for high school students to study?
Well, I mean, for me, it's about the saying of those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. We should learn from the past. The history is not something dead that we can't still benefit from. So particularly when it comes to the rise of authoritarianism you see in many places in the world today. Or
Pattern recognition.
We see the rise of anti-Semitism. These are concerns, and those of us who are tied in tightly to history, we look for these patterns. How do authoritarian leaders come to power? How do crimes of hate increase, and how do you fight against that? So I've always felt the mission as a social studies teacher that does World War II, that to try to impress upon my students that every generation has to be vigilant. There's no such thing as the defeat of the Nazis in 1945. It doesn't end there.
Evil's done. Yeah,
it doesn't end there, and every generation has to be vigilant and on the lookout for authoritarianism.
That's a great one-liner. Every generation has to be vigilant. That's really profound. I like that a lot. Yeah, I can't remember who I saw it from or what I read, but it was something along the lines of Hitler and fascism and Nazism didn't just take over. It was slowly, and
there's a process.
It was progressively and procedurally introduced.
Exactly.
And people were just like, okay. And that's the terrifying part about, World War II and Nazism. And the Third Reich was that I think he was voted democratically. There was a vote.
Eventually the Nazis would control the parliament. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was
the Reichstag. Yeah.
So, and when I read about those specific facts, it's that's wild, because it's so you view it as so old, and that I would never do that, or I could never do that. But then you read these firsthand accounts and the fear of people, I had to vote, because I would have been killed,
And democracy is complicated. It's difficult. It's not easy, and when you introduce difficult economic times, right? And again, you press upon students that look how Mussolini comes to power, Hitler comes to power. It's in the midst of difficult economic challenges, and countries that did not have a lot of experience with democracy were the most vulnerable, to fall to authoritarian leaders. I mean, countries like the United States, England, France. We had a tradition, we had an experience with democracy. But Italy and Germany, particularly Germany after World War I, had gone from emperor to a democratic system, and it's difficult.
They had their growing pains much later than we did.
Yeah, because Germany and Italy united much later than England, France, and
that's interesting.
United States. They were newer the countries in a sense. Really, it was in the 1860s, 1870s that Italy and Germany become the states that we know of as today.
Do you think students oversimplify history? Is that a flaw that you see in your classrooms, that they paint things with such a broad brush? Or do you try and kind of remind students that it's so complex and there's so many moving parts? Or do you think history is a broad brush that could be summarized quickly?
Well, I mean, the way we teach the course, I think in New York, world history was a 2-year course. So there's a lot more that you have to, fit in 1 year here. One regret that I have here is that we really don't get to spend time starting out with the classical civilization, with the ancient world. In New York we did that, so we don't really get a chance to go into Greece. Where democracy begins, and Rome, and we kind of start out in the Middle Ages, so we skip over an important part of history, all the classical civilization. So I do my best to try to fill in my students in that, and then and proceed, because we begin basically with the Middle Ages, but they need to understand in the middle of what was it in the middle of? It was in the middle of ancient civilization, classical civilization, and the Renaissance. So the bottom part of that is missing.
And I'm learning over here too. I'm taking notes. Okay.
Yeah. So we do our best to fill students in with that, and
the Middle Ages were literally in the middle of the Renaissance and the ancients.
And the ancient world, yeah.
Oh. I know the Middle Ages,
right.
Knights, but I was like, oh, it's literally in the middle.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's why we call it the Middle Ages.
And
the early part of the Middle Ages were the Dark Ages. Right?
Oh.
The first few hundred years after the fall of Rome, we refer to as the Dark Ages. But and that gives students a chance to know that there were other civilizations that were emerging, and some that had stored or much of what was learned during classical times, particularly the Islamic civilization and, the Middle East. That was an important part. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern part of the Roman Empire, helped to, keep, store, protect a lot of the learning that was lost with the fall of Rome and the western part of the empire.
Gotcha. I was studying Plato in college because I did like an early music history course where we had 2 semesters, and like one semester was 1700s to present, and the other one was ancient times to 1700s. I don't know why we taught it backwards like that and not sequentially. Mm-hmm. But it's cool to read. I read the Republic, not all of it, and I don't understand all of it. It's so profound, but I read part of the Republic by Plato. And it's cool that you mentioned that because they're literally trying to figure out democracy then. Mm-hmm. Like, we look back at other countries and we look at the past like, oh, that's how you do democracy. But they were like the idea of one person and one vote and who should vote. And like, it was incredibly interesting.
And it's a radical concept for that time period. Now, and I also this gives us an opportunity to press upon our students that, okay, we use the word democracy. But what that meant in Athens was, landowning males. Yeah, so it'll be some time, right, where before even women could. I tell the kids, my grandmother couldn't vote when she was a young woman, right? They still had not, gotten the vote yet, and
that's just one generation.
So and we talk about, I think I mentioned in the. After the Civil War, you have African American males that can vote, but still, women could not vote. So it took a while, and in the clock of history, it wasn't that long ago. I tried to impress upon my students, it wasn't that long ago. So the concept of democracy varies from time period to time period. Yeah. So where we are today is
something that I really enjoyed about the super short stint that I was reading Plato was that a lot of his arguments are still like really relevant. Like there's a small chapter in his book where he talks about how like should everyone really vote, and he jokes how like do you want dumb people voting? But then like it's this whole idea of that he says like if you're on a boat and you probably know like the analogy like if there's no captain on the boat, and you have to vote for a captain. Who are you going to vote for? You're going to vote for the most qualified person. But like in a direct democracy, you can be the most popular person and win a vote, but you're not the most qualified. And so he was grappling. How do you handle popularity tainting democracy versus like sheer qualifications, and like he had some hot takes. He was like.
And do you think our founding fathers took that into consideration when they created the Electoral College?
I had this conversation because I forgot who I was talking to. I think it was probably my mom or my dad. And I was like, I didn't understand like the Electoral College. I was like, what's the point, And I was like, it's in case it's a really bad vote.
It's a safety check, the safety check against the masses. But in the period of information, technology that we live in today, you have to wonder how long will people tolerate this indirect version and ask for, hey, just the popular vote. Should the popular vote decide who the president is, and not this electoral college mechanism.
And I think it's really interesting how that's a conversation that should be had. It's not like everything's fine, we'll just be like you said, like every generation has to be vigilant. Like there's definitely a case for either one. Yeah. And it's such a nuanced conversation. And I've really learned to enjoy the nuance in history, I think.
Welcome to political science.
Yeah, it's so fascinating how like you can hear someone give a really convincing take.
Sure.
And I saw like a YouTube video, and he was like, yeah, like why don't we have an IQ barrier for voting? And then you at first you're like, no way, it's so unfair and unjust. And then like he starts talking, you're like, whoa, like there's like one or two things that are kind of true in this, like, whoa, how do we deal with this? And like the other person in the video was talking about how we should fix our education systems to inform citizens more rather than eliminate the right to vote. And then they were discussing, relatively peacefully, surprisingly, the options. But yeah, I love it. I love World War II stuff because of the same reason. There's so many there's so many things happening, and it's such a busy chapter in human history that I've learned to just enjoy like reading these nuanced things.
And don't forget, the end of World War II brought about the baby boomers, the baby boom generation, who have basically shaped, modern America. As such a large, percentage of the population. Think about how they've influenced the culture and dominated politics. And here we are. What is America going to look like when the baby boomer generation finally
fades out?
Leaves the stage. And you got this millennial generation that is ready to challenge the boomers.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Certainly from a political scientist's perspective.
So I've heard the term left and right, but what is the fundamental root? Like, what does political science mean? Because when someone hears political science, they think Democrats, Republicans, American two-party system, but like, what is the study of political science?
It's a study of governmental systems, basically. So we took courses on comparative democratic systems. How is the American democratic system different, say, than the British? We have a different type of legislature, right? Two houses versus parliament, or they have a prime minister versus our president. So they're different types of democracy. There isn't just one type of democracy, So certainly there are parliamentary democracy, and at the time we studied comparative communist systems, and communism could be different in the Soviet Union than as it was in China. But political science is about the study of the structure, the formation, structure, the organization of governments, how they work. Basically, it's who decides. Who makes decisions over the allocation of society's resources? Ultimately, it's what politics does, right?
So, I kind of always think of it in two lenses. Where I like reading about information and studying information and learning as much as I can. But then I also like the interpretation and the philosophy behind it. So like, I like studying how governments work, but then like I also like posing questions like for you, like, do you think power corrupts people?
It can. It has. History has shown us that it does, and that's why we have checks. Why we have these checks and balances. Yeah. That was part of the brilliance of our founding fathers. These how each branch can check the other, and it's a good thing to have. But at times it can also be stifling. Kind of in that mode where we are now. It's hard to get anything done,
It gets in the way of action.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I was thinking to myself the other day, like, this is my second year teaching high school in general. And I've been a little bit off-put as to the amount of power that we have as a teacher over students. Like, I can tell my students in from a marching band rehearsal, I was like, hey, just go run for an hour. And like, they might groan and complain, but they'll run. Like, and that was just, I had this weird aha moment where like, I wanted to be like super respectful and careful of this power I have over students. And I was reading about like governments and like how I was reading the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And like,
oh wow,
yeah,
you're back a ways,
yeah. But in like, do you know about them? Have you read them at all?
The what?
So he had like a personal diary, Marcus Aurelius, and he wrote to himself like a journal.
Yes.
And then we
I heard
discovered
about that.
it later, but it's so profound, and he was so humble. And he was like, I need to make sure I'm humble because my people count. It's beautifully written. It's super poetic, and I've been reading that to kind of remind myself that like I need to like make sure that what I'm doing is for the good of the classroom. Like I'm always putting that.
Today we look at it as professionalism, professional ethics, right? And as social studies teacher, as a social studies teacher, it's always on our minds to, our job is not to, influence students politically. Our job is to try to get them to understand, to get them to question for themselves, and But where it gets difficult sometimes, we always, have to play sort of devil's advocate. And I think this is where sometimes people in society think that, we're pushing our own personal political agenda. If you say it's blue, I'm going to make the argument that it's red. You say it's red, I'm going to make the argument that it's blue, because that's, I'm a big believer in the Socratic method of teaching, and, I engage in a lot of discussion, and I will answer questions with questions,
Oh, okay.
It's, the belief that students learn best when they engage in the conversation, in the debate about what goes on. And, my role as a teacher is to, keep shooting provocative questions at them. And sometimes when they ask a question, I may answer them with another question, to engage in discussion. And that's my teaching style.
You're testing to
that's
see
how I was trained.
How deeply rooted they know the information. How well do you know your stuff?
Or how well can you, organize and defend your own opinion, and your own beliefs, your own values, So, we try to do that, and unfortunately, sometimes I think some people think that you hear a lot of pressure coming from outside, education, in like, we're trying to politically influence kids or push a private agenda, and that I find that hurtful, and I find it insulting, because we try hard to be neutral, but to do our job, we have to argue the opposite side. So if I'm arguing the opposite side, it doesn't mean I'm trying to promote that side. I'm just, you pick one side, I'm going to make some of the arguments for the other side, okay, to get you to see, the full perspective. But it's become more difficult in recent years, because it's a reflection of the political climate in the country. It's a reflection of the division in the country. So people are a lot more sensitive to that. But I think we try our best to be ethical, to be professional, and we don't
to ask
promote
questions.
Sure. And sometimes it must be really hard to be a young teacher, to be a new teacher these days. So I'm battle scarred. I'm a veteran of these of the education wars, and I'm battle hardened. So I welcome it. And there's been generational change. Remember, when I first started teaching, my students' parents were older than me, right? And then at some point, they were my peers, and then at another point, now I am older than my students' parents. I'm obviously of a different generation. So I don't have that. I don't have that same natural connection that I had to the boomers who were. I'm a younger boomer, but I'm a boomer, and now I'm dealing with parents, a completely different generation from me, and it's a different challenge. At the same point, I have this I guess. Now that I've raised with my wife, we raised 3 children, and all college educated, successful, thriving adults, married.
Congratulations.
And thanks.
That's a big deal.
So I guess I have some moral justification when I talk to parents about listen, Junior's not getting sleep at night. Okay, you need to do something about this, right? Yeah. I feel I can speak in a way that I could not speak as a 22-year-old, right? Yes. I started teaching when I was 22. My students were like 4 years younger than me. I'm still friends on Facebook with students. I'm 64. They're turning 60. They're my former students. I have 60-year-old former students. My first captain of the first soccer team that I coached, he's 60 years old.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So in those days, I could, if I went to a disco or a nightclub, one of my students could be in there and say, "Hey, can I buy you a drink, coach?" Think about that, because you only had to be 18 then. So
time flies.
Yeah. So now I'm at a different point in my life, and I've raised, my wife and we've raised a family. So there's things that I've learned, experience that I have, that I feel more comfortable in talking, truth to parents about, what's going on with their kid and how they need to address it, because, I walk the walk.
Yeah.
I walk the walk. And again, I wouldn't have done that as a 25, 26-year-old.
Yeah.
But today I'm at a different place in life that I can do that.
It's funny you bring up sleep because sleep is such a big thing. I'll hear kids like, "Oh, I had like 3 hours of sleep." I was like, "You are dying." Like it's so not good for you.
This is the number one, I think, challenge, and I share this with my doctors, I think, and other people. The number one challenge I face as an educator is sleep deprivation.
Really?
Okay, it's not drugs, not alcohol. It's sleep deprivation. My kids are exhausted. None of them get the 8.5 to 9 hours sleep that scientists say they should get. And even the most motivated kids who want to learn, who love school,
Car runs out of gas.
are struggling at times. And this is, breaks my heart. So I call them rants, but I do some rants with my students about sleep deprivation and about all the things that it can, lead to obesity, to depression, to mood swings, to, diabetes. I mean, it's all related to sleep deprivation. They are chronically sleep deprived. And now they're connecting it to long-term memory loss, and
I saw that.
So
Alzheimer's, it skyrockets when you don't have.
It's when my number one if we look at depression rates amongst teenagers and suicide rates, you notice that they correlate with the advent of the technology that started stealing sleep time from kids. So it's a crisis, and it's not just our kids; it's all over the country, maybe all over the world. Even adults who don't get enough sleep. But
I'm glad you
big.
brought it up because I do this thing like even sometimes like on a Wellness Wednesday, I'll be like, everyone put your phones out. Like, what's your screen time? And like some the lowest I've ever heard from a student is 3 hours, right? And some of them's like 4, 5. So I heard 8 hours one day. One of my students had 8 hours of screen time. And I was like, okay, that's a third of your day. Literally 1/3. So in 1 week, what was it, 8 times 7? I can't math, obviously. 56 hours, 24. That's 2 days in a week where your eyes are glued to a screen. Yeah. And let's be honest, like you're not learning. Like you're not improving your life. You're not doing anything. Yeah. Like, you're not working out. You're not eating health. Like I tell them how the key to like success is so simple. Like if you just lower your screen time, you sweat for 15 minutes. You stop and think before you eat that 12-pack of donuts, right? Like you go out and see the sun once a day. Like I have students where like they'll come here super early. They'll be on their phones, headphones in and everything. They'll leave late, get home. They'll never even see the sun. So yeah, like vitamin D deficiency, sleep deprivation, like it's a giant.
And they're not getting the same amount of exercise, and
huge is exercise.
And then you have a situation where you could you now can relate to thousands, millions of people, yet you're all alone in your room. It's critical. We have to address it. Society needs to address it. I'm hoping one light at the end of the tunnel is that our kids are so proficient in technology that they will have a better grasp on how to protect their children from what's out there. I mean, my generation, my wife and I were always a step behind our kids. We couldn't keep up with them, right? They would know more than we knew. But I think today, when I look at how skilled they are with the technology, I think their children will not be able to fool them, get away with stuff because they just so much more comfortable and with the technology. That's hopefully, I hope that's going to be the case, that today's teenager is going to be a parent someday that will really know how to control what their child is seeing on a cell phone. I hope.
It's absolutely insane when you look at hours clocking in, and like I think I would use the word addiction. It's just so addictive.
Absolutely, it's addictive.
And like they're just hooked, and like next thing you know, it's been 2 hours and you're on your bed.
Yeah.
And like I tell my kids, like the idea of doing nothing for 2 hours is like I have to do something. I have so many responsibilities in the real world to do that. For me to just stop and scroll and look at other people doing stuff, no way. That would give me depression.
Yeah, it's a concern. It's this is the first real generation that has come into this, and social scientists are going to be studying this for decades to come. What have we done with this technology, and what is the impact on the young people today?
I think a big one too that I saw, in particular, also in college a little bit now, were how dating apps were made, so that it's relatively easy to communicate with someone you wanted to be a significant other with, whereas before technology, it was like you had to face anxiety. There was this rite of passage, like if you want to ask this person to homecoming, to like prom, like it's nerve wracking, and like that's good. That's a normal thing. You got to overcome that. And now, like I had like a couple of students who were like, "Oh, I don't know what to do." I was like, "Have you tried talking to this person?"
Right.
I was like, "Oh, I can't." And I was like you can't? Like it's so weird to see. What has it done to our social skills for kids? Exactly,
yeah.
Communication skills and social skills.
Yeah.
A lot of my students are just like terrified. Like public speaking is a big one. We're like, oh, I don't. Like they'll say, I don't public speak. Like, you're going to have to. Like,
well, that's always been one of the top phobias. We talk about that in our psych class as well. The evaluation apprehension. That's been something that we've been dealing with for a long time. It's a new world. I guess we have to adapt, we have to adjust, we have to figure it out, but we have to do right for the next generation. There's some real concerns out there.
I think it goes back to your discussion about Socratic teaching and how like you are risking something in conversation and in dialogue, but the benefits far outweigh the risks of just staying silent on some of these things.
Yeah. Oh no.
To just like, oh, that's a taboo topic. We can't talk about this. Or oh, like I don't feel like talking about it. Like, okay, I understand. I get it. But like, there has to be a line where like there's a trend. Something's happening.
Right.
And I can only relate to.
I mean, we've got the data to support it. I mean, we have scientific studies, to support this. It's not just making it up. It's not something that is pushing an agenda. It's the studies are there, and it's a real concern.
Exists whether you look at it or not.
Yeah, and they're seeing, and along those lines, we also talk about what's been going on, with young men, young boys. We're seeing, if we're looking. Look at this in the long term here. Young women have been thriving now. If you look at who the valedictorians are, or the graduation rates, you see that girls have surpassed boys, and for a long time now, right? We've been working very hard to nurture the self-esteem of young women, right? And say, hey, you can be anything you want to be, and it's a different world, and we've done pretty good. I mean, I used to take my daughter to take your daughter to work day, I used to take her and set her up with the highest female administrators, highest female administrators at the university, right? To spend the day with a university vice president and to show my daughter that, look, you can be anything. There's no limits. But we may have left some of the boys behind.
I definitely
Something is going on, okay, that we need to reassess and reevaluate. What's happening to young men, and certainly in terms of their their motivation in academic excellence and so forth.
I definitely agree.
And just look at the stats. Just look in when they publish all the valedictorians.
That's a number I saw recently. Like,
yes,
it's overwhelming. The majority of new college freshmen overwhelmingly becoming more and more female.
So we've done a great job in lifting the self-esteem of young women, but we got to be careful here that we don't leave the boys behind.
I definitely see that. For example, I visit this topic every once in a while when I'm studying or reading something, because I try and read more now. Especially, I think reading is like a lost art where we're just not reading a lot of the classics. So like one of my New Year's resolution was to like just sit down and read good things more often. So I'm reading some more like Dostoevsky and like Gulag Archipelago and like these profound books.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn, huh?
Yeah, and it's profound. It's just like it's so incredibly
especially if you grew up during the Cold War.
And I'm like reading these firsthand accounts, like these memoirs that are just and it motivates, like, why is anyone talking about it? It's crazy, like this book is so. But when I think about like school shootings and like the epidemic that we're dealing with, there's just more and more. And the trend that I always see is that it's always a young guy. And
Oh yeah, overwhelmingly male.
It's
Overwhelmingly.
male. Like it's almost unique. Like it's almost this issue with the way that they think and the way that they, like the mental illness they have and
of course, we address this in psychology,
Yeah.
where when men are hurting, when they finally erupt, they lash out on everyone else. Females are more likely to internalize that pain. That's why you see more females who like cut themselves, whereas men, lash out at others, kill. These school shooters, males, they're mad at the world. They go out and harm everyone else. I tell them about that co-pilot on the Lufthansa flight. He wanted to a couple years ago. He wanted to commit suicide. So he waits for the pilot to go out. He locks him out and crashes a plane into a mountain, kills 150 people or something because he wanted to commit suicide. That's such a male thing, right? You just can't picture a female doing something like that. They don't lash out at everyone else when they're hurting. They tend to internalize. Males just explode, and if I'm suffering, everybody else is going to suffer too. That's been the general trend, and we talk about that in my psych class. Because men are the ones who are most likely to lash out at others, right? But they're the least likely to go get help.
Yes.
So we have been
that.
conditioned, right? Women feel more comfortable in expressing their feelings and how they feel. Men, we've been conditioned to believe that it's a sign of weakness. That we hold our emotions in. We don't. We don't express those things. Otherwise, we'll look weak and we'll embarrass ourselves with our peers. Yeah. And so, because for men, it's all about the status. What's our our status amongst our peers. So those who are most likely to do harm are the least likely to get help. That's an uncomfortable thought.
Yeah, I during the summer I visited a couple of manifestos that I wanted to read about because I actually had a good an English teacher that I'm still friends with that taught me in high school. She was like, I was talking to her about why are there so many bad things, and she's like, you have to get inside their head, and you have to read where they're coming from. And I discovered that the Columbine University shooters,
high school.
Columbine High School.
Yeah.
I was thinking Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
The Columbine High School shooters kept diaries, and the families published them online for everyone to read. And when you read a couple of the pages, it's incredibly violent. It's vile. It's just so much anger.
Yes.
And it's 100 something pages, 200 something pages of just violent thoughts.
And notice they're generally, outcasts.
Yeah.
So
no one liked them at school.
And that's, that's another thing, again, we address in psychology class, right? That it's so important. One of the things I've always, loved about Cape High is we have so many clubs, so many activities. See, everyone needs a place to fit in,
yes.
to belong somewhere. That's such a healthy thing.
Yeah. And
a school that has lots of clubs, lots of sports, lots of things. We give more opportunities for kids to fit in somewhere. Mm-hmm. And when you're fitting in and doing stuff that you enjoy and making friends with, you're less likely to think about going around hurting people.
Yeah, you're not you don't feel like you're ostracized.
Right. And notice it's often those who are cast aside who lash out. So I always thought that was one of the strengths of this school. My two sons came here, graduated here, and my daughter went to another school. I won't name it, but when we compared the activities, the clubs, and the teachers willing to sponsor these clubs, I mean, it was just a different world. Our kids, our sons had, so many things to do and involved in so many things, and that's just a healthy thing. And I've always thought that was one of Cape High's greatest strengths. We keep as many kids as possible engaged in something extracurricular.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Looking back at high school, my high school experience, it wasn't that long ago. But in my high school experience, I always remember my experiences with my friends doing marching band. I was in the drum line, I was with my snare drums, and I remember we went to a McDonald's and we just got kicked out because we were being too loud. And I remember laughing, and I remember that was more important for my character building than all the classes I took. Like, yeah, I had great teachers, and, you know, I try to do well in my academics. And for all the listeners here, like, study, do your homework. But I vividly remember, like, hanging out with my friends, like, doing the thing that we like, going to the rehearsals and going to the football games and doing something.
Well, there's academic intelligence and there's social intelligence. Right?
I was not academically intelligent.
We have to nurture both. You know, we have to nurture both. There's a time for, you know, academic excellence and work. And
is this your last year here at Cape Coral High School? Or is that undeclared? Possibly not sure. Is that
no comment?
Okay.
Let's just say that I'm old enough that any year could be my last year. Okay.
So with the topic of retirement, because one of the main attracting features in interviewing you is that you are on, respectfully, you're on the second half of life where you're able to look back and reflect on things that you've done. Second
half, that's generous. The last quarter might be more realistic, but go ahead.
Do you think, like, it's so, like, the topic of retirement for me is so weird, and I've had to think about it. I need to do, like, my pension stuff. I need to get that ball rolling in my head. But, like, I love what I do so much, and I don't see retirement as an option for me. However, I'm also young and naive, and I'm just so energetic, and, you know, and all of my battle-hardened, you know, my mentors are like, you'll get there, you know. So if/when you decide to retire, do you have retirement plans, or, you know?
Oh, of course, you plan ahead. You make sure, you know, your ducks are in a row. But certainly, I'm not one that counts down the days. Definitely not.
Okay. There are some people that do. Yeah.
I don't feel that way at all. I mean, even there are times we've have, you know, days off from school that I wasn't even aware of. A 3-day weekend, I didn't even know we had Monday off. I mean, I enjoy engaging with my students.
You do.
And I think it keeps me healthier too. It keeps me sharp, you know, coming in every day and debating with teenagers and, you know, and discussing things. I mean, it keeps my mind sharp. So no, I enjoy what I do.
Yeah, I do as well.
You know, and I think I guess I've reached a point where, you know, in my career where I've been given the freedom and flexibility to, you know, engage with my classes. I'm not micromanaged in any way, and, you know, so it's still fun.
Yeah,
it's still fun. It's always been fun to teach. You know, the other stuff that can, you know, get in the way, I try not to let that get me down. Mm-hmm. You know, a parent who, you know, attacks you from something, or, you know, a kid who's angry, whatever. You know, I try not to hold grudges. That's something I also try to do. You know, if I get into a scuffle with you on Monday, and I try to remember Tuesday is a brand new day, you know, because I remember I'm dealing with teenagers. Come on, I'm dealing with teenagers, you know, and I just go back and say, remember when you were a teenager, Aldo? I said, okay, so I just remember. So. You know, and I find that, and, you know, and for the most part, kids don't hold grudges either. I mean, that's not what I've experienced. So every day is a brand new day. No matter what happened yesterday, you know, whatever, you know, if you said something to me and, you know, said something nasty, you know, tomorrow's a new day. We'll start fresh. I'm not gonna let it, you know, get to me. So yeah, I mean, I don't count down the days. I don't hate what I do, and often, you know, I've said to my students, I think I said one of the blessings that I would wish upon you is that you enjoy your career and profession as much as I've enjoyed mine. I don't dread coming to work in the morning, you know. Yeah. My dad worked in a factory. You know, he took a bus to another bus, to a ferry, to a subway to get to work in a factory all day sewing collars onto shirts. I mean, how in the world can I complain? I don't work in a coal mine, right? Yeah. Look what I get to do every day. I get to talk about history and political science, and now psychology. I've grown to love psychology. You know, because obviously it's more applicable to their lives. It's a little more challenging trying to convince a sophomore why something that happened 500 years ago is important.
Yeah.
That's a little more challenging. But, you know, in a psych class, when you're talking about things that are, you know, directly applicable to their lives, I think, wow, you know, it's easier to command their attention. But I do, and I say to them, you know, if you can get paid to do something that you love to do, then you are a lucky person. And they hear a lot about teacher salaries, and I say, well, I've got a lot of friends who made more money than I made. Yeah. they hated going to work every day, and they were miserable. And I really never felt miserable coming to work. I'm grateful to to spend the day with young people and to talk about stuff that I love. History, political science, psychology.
My dad was an immigrant to this country, and sometimes I'll drive back from work. I'll be like, oh, I had a bad rehearsal. I didn't get the stuff I want to get done. I'll get in my head, and I was like, hold up, there are people dying in the world right now.
Yeah.
I have the privilege of driving a car to work in a building that is air conditioned to teach music. My situation is not that bad.
Yeah.
I think I'll be fine. And I remind myself often of it's such a privilege. I view it for me. Some teachers would disagree because and rightfully so. Some would say we are underpaid, and that's a different topic. But I have the privilege of teaching kids music, and I view it as a privilege and not as a right. I demand this. The fact that my job exists is such a fascinating privilege for me to have. And I love it what I do.
We knew, I knew what I signed up for, right? I knew it wasn't going to be rich.
I knew it.
I knew it wasn't going to be rich. But I was going to spend my time, but soccer played a part in that too, because, if you love history and you love soccer, well, inevitably, teaching and coaching was the route for me, and again, I try to tell students, we talk about identity formation for psychology, and I tried to ease or comfort my students in knowing, you can't have it all figured out now. Don't worry about having it all figured out now.
Oh, yeah.
You're 16, 17 years old, you're still in the process of identity formation. And my advice to them is to try to figure out what your passion is. Think about what you're passionate about, and then ask yourself, can I make a living engaged in my passion? Because if you can do that, if you can come to work every day and get paid to do something you love to do, then you're a lucky person. And stop fretting about people who make more than you, because they may not be happier than you. And and that's how I've tried to approach it.
What I tell my students, because I have a couple of students that are I don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Sure.
They don't know what to do. And I was one of the advice that I was given was just pick something that you like and just put your energy actively towards doing that thing. It can change.
Sure.
It's okay. It's probably normal for it to change. I think it's more abnormal for people to know exactly what they want at such a young age. There are some people that they knew they wanted to teach music since they were 13. And they've been pursuing it since they were 13. I wasn't like that. I wanted to be a paleontologist when I was a kid.
Of course.
Then I wanted to work in the FBI, and I thought it'd be so cool. At one point, the Army was cool. And then, music came when I was, 16, 17.
Wow.
And I stuck with that. But, it's okay for things to change, but it's not okay to just do nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, do something. Whether that be technical college, whether that be an apprenticeship, whether that be college, community college, university, as long as you have something to pursue, and then just trying your best at that, and understanding that even if that's not the end goal, you still went for it.
Yeah.
There's so much merit that you tried.
I see there's a lot of kids who have anxiety over this, worrying about what they're going to do. They're who am I? Where do I fit in this world? What am I going to do in my life?
I don't know.
and I do try my best to relieve that anxiety, to reduce that anxiety, and say, hey, you can't have it all figured out now. It's okay. You're exactly, where you should be at this point in life.
You should not have everything.
You can't have it all figured out at your age. I mean, I didn't realize, I didn't figure out that I was going to be a teacher and a coach till I was about 22. When I finished my bachelor's in political science, I said, okay, what am I going to do? Work for government, or, well, the option was get my master's, teach, and coach. So I was about 22 years old by the time, and basically I was influenced by my college soccer coach. One day I just looked at him and said, wow, he teaches political science. He coaches soccer.
That's awesome.
His two wonderful sons,
a real mentor.
A lovely wife. And I said to myself, I want to be like him.
Yeah.
I want to be like him. And that's what did it for me. So you don't know when he goes off. So, but a lot of kids, I think feel a lot of stress over this.
Yeah.
And so I do my best to try to reduce and alleviate that stress and say, listen, it's okay. it's okay if you don't have it all figured out. Life does what it has to do, and it will come. Someday it will come to you, and it'll be very clear, and you'll find your way. So, there's enough things to worry about. Teenagers have to worry about these days. I mean, and I do tell them, I honestly feel it's so much more complicated being a 17-year-old today than when I was a 17-year-old. I honestly believe that. I tell them that, hey, I'm not, saying this just to gain your favor. I say, life seems so much simpler when I was 17, and it seems so much more complicated today.
The world was smaller
for our teenagers, and so I admire them in many ways. And how they push you. And then, throw on top, the hurricane, the pandemic, the recession, all this stuff, throw it all on top. Yeah. It's like, hey, this generation here, they've gone through some tough times. So they've been hardened. So maybe in some ways that'll make them stronger through life.
Yeah, I remember I was a senior at FGCU, about to graduate. The semester, like that spring, I was going to graduate, and then COVID hit in March. We wanted to shut down. And I remember 3 weeks before COVID was even like a thing, I was auditioning at like University of North Florida. I was going to get my master's. I got accepted to go do like my graduate school. I'm stoked. I'm excited. I'm going to move to Jacksonville, and then boom, like, nope, you're staying right there. And it was, I didn't get upset, because I think I was like 20, I was 23 when that happened. But it was just so funny to me how, like, no matter how well I think I've planned my life, just something just comes in, nope, you're not going to do that. and then for me to get angry at that, or for me to get anxiety about that, wouldn't do anyone anything, any good. So
a veteran teacher told me many years ago that teaching is the art of improvisation, and I learned about that in coaching as well. No matter how laid out my plans are, something is always going to throw it off, and you got to be able to improvise and adjust and adapt on the fly. Certainly as a soccer coach, you plan out a certain practice session, and okay, this one doesn't show up, that one doesn't show up. Now he's got a test, he's got something, and now I got to reformulate.
Like an hour earlier, and
you got to be able to to improvise. Just as as an old grizzled referee told me when I was just starting out, and he says, Aldo, if you want to be a good referee, you must overcome the human desire to be loved. Okay, if you can overcome that, you could be a good referee, because otherwise, don't pick up the whistle. And and so simply put, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I love what we do. I think I'm privileged to do what I do.
Agreed.
Mr. Nardiello, it's time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I can already tell an episode 2 is going to be planned, because it was an absolute delight, sir. We'll send this your way. We'll send you.
Wonderful.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, sir. Round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.